It was one of the biggest shows in American history, a vibrant splash of color on black and white screens, a Sunday night tradition that millions wouldn't dare miss. Bonanza wasn't just a TV show, it was a phenomenon, and the Cartwrights weren't just characters, they felt like family. But behind the wholesome ranch life, the epic landscapes, and the fatherly wisdom of Ben Cartwright, there were tensions, secrets, and scenes the network didn't want the world to see. Strange decisions were made behind closed doors, and somewhere along the way, the story changed completely off-screen. And just when fans expected the show to ride into the sunset, it suddenly vanished. What happened behind the cameras? Why were some episodes pushed aside and never seen again? And what truth was too risky for even Bonanza to tell? You'll be shocked to find out the truth. The rise of Bonanza. Before Netflix, before cable, and before hundreds of channels began fighting for attention, there was the iconic television show Bonanza. And back in 1959, no one had ever seen anything quite like it. It didn't just gallop onto the television scene, it actually changed the game. It had bright colors, a huge budget, and a cast of strong personalities ready to change and reinvent television. But what made Bonanza so different? And how exactly was it able to go from a risky experiment to becoming one of the most beloved shows in American TV history? Back in the late 1950s, most TV shows were still black and white, and westerns were everywhere. You couldn't flip the dial without bumping into a cowboy or a shootout. Something was missing, and that's where Bonanza came in. When NBC decided to greenlight Bonanza, it wasn't just another cowboy drama. It was something bold, fresh, and slightly risky. NBC made the bold decision to film it entirely in color, which was a huge deal at the time because color television sets were still rare and expensive. So, most viewers at home were still watching in black and white. But NBC had a plan. They weren't just making a show, they were trying to sell more color televisions. So, Bonanza wasn't just a TV show, it was actually a sales pitch. From day one, Bonanza wasn't cheap. NBC poured a lot of money into its production. The sets were big, the costumes were carefully designed, and the locations were stunning. They weren't just throwing actors in a dusty town, they made sure everything was high quality. Another factor that made it so successful was the fact that they gave it a tough time slot, too. It was slated for Sunday night at 9 p.m., which was considered prime time. But it wasn't too easy. At first, the show struggled. The ratings weren't impressive, and some thought the show might get eventually dropped. But slowly, something started to happen. People began to fall in love with the show, not just for its gunfights or cowboy hats, but for the Cartwright family. Most westerns back then were about loners, drifters, or lawmen solving weekly problems with their fists or their six-shooters. But Bonanza was different. It gave viewers something they hadn't seen in a western before: a strong, united family. At the heart of the story was Ben Cartwright, a widowed father raising his three sons, Adam, Hoss, and little Joe, on the sprawling Ponderosa ranch near Virginia City, Nevada. Each son had a different mother, and each of them added an extra layer of drama and personality to the show. Adam was the smart, serious one. Hoss was the big-hearted, gentle giant, while little Joe was the charming, fiery youngest, and their father Ben was the rock of the family. He was stern but loving, moral, and wise. This focus on family gave Bonanza an emotional core. It wasn't just about solving crimes or chasing bad guys. It was also about relationships, loyalty, and moral choices. As the seasons rolled on, more and more viewers tuned in. By its second and third seasons, Bonanza was gaining serious traction. It climbed the ratings charts and didn't look back. By 1964, just 5 years after its debut, Bonanza was the #1 show in America. Not just for a week or a month, but for 3 straight years, it topped the Nielsen ratings. Looking back now, it's easy to see how Bonanza laid the groundwork for so many future series. It pioneered the idea that a show could mix action and emotion, family values and real conflict, and entertainment and education. But of course, no show stays that beloved without a few secrets hiding behind the scenes. Because, as wholesome and heartfelt as Bonanza appeared on the surface, there were moments the network didn't want fans to see. A few scenes sparked more tension than anyone expected, and some were even buried quietly, and never aired again. But what happened? Why did the network try to hide it? What was so controversial and so unexpected? Well, to understand that, we've got to take a much closer look at the cast behind the camera. Because the Cartwrights may have been a tight-knit family on screen, but off-screen, things weren't always so simple. The stars of the Ponderosa. If Bonanza was the heart of America's living rooms in the 1960s, then the cast was its heartbeat. These weren't just actors in cowboy hats. They were larger-than-life personalities with deep stories of their own. And behind all that Western charm, there was laughter, tension, and a few serious surprises that fans never saw coming. There was Lorne Greene, who became Ben Cartwright, the rock-solid father of the Bonanza clan. He was a respected radio broadcaster who read grim war news during World War II, and his voice and calm presence are exactly what made him so perfect as Ben. He wasn't just any dad on TV, he was a widowed father who'd lost 3 wives and was raising 3 grown sons. That in itself made Bonanza different. There was depth, there was drama, and there was Ben, holding it all together. Then there was Pernell Roberts, who played Adam Cartwright, the oldest, smart, quiet, and a little brooding son. On screen, he was cool and collected, but off-screen, he was anything but quiet. To fans, Adam Cartwright was mysterious, but to the crew, Pernell Roberts was just difficult. He clashed with producers so often that by 1965, just 6 seasons in, he took an extremely drastic decision that completely changed the show. Next up is Dan Blocker, or as everyone knew him, Hoss. Dan was the heart and soul of Bonanza. He played Hoss Cartwright, the middle son, with a warm, goofy kindness that audiences adored. His huge size made him stand out. He was well over 6 feet tall and weighed close to 300 pounds, but his gentle personality made him unforgettable. Off-screen, Dan was just as beloved. Everyone loved working with him. He brought humor to the set and went out of his way to keep things friendly, even when tempers flared. But Dan's story eventually took a heartbreaking turn that broke the hearts of not just the show's crew, but also that of the audience when he passed away from complications following a gallbladder surgery. Then there was the youngest Cartwright, named Little Joe, played by none other than Michael Landon. Michael had the charm, the hair, the smirk, and the ambition. When the show started, Landon quickly became a teen idol. Girls across America were writing him fan mail by the truckload. But he wasn't just a pretty face. He also had real talent. Michael watched and learned, and soon he was writing scripts, directing episodes, and taking more and more creative control. Behind the scenes, Landon worked really hard. He was serious about the show, serious about storytelling, and slowly became one of the most powerful voices on set. But that power didn't come without friction, because as Landon grew more influential, some crew members felt pushed aside, while others were inspired by his drive. The truth was that Bonanza looked like a close-knit family on screen, and most of the time, it really was. But that doesn't mean it was all hugs and handshakes behind the camera. The cast wasn't just acting. They were shaping television history, and they gave everything they had to bring the Cartwrights to life. But sometimes the real stories behind the scenes were even wilder than the ones on screen, and the challenges the show faced were not what anyone expected. The challenges on set. For millions of Americans, Bonanza meant Sunday night comfort food on the living room screen. The colorful scenes of the Ponderosa Ranch, the Cartwrights' sturdy moral compass, and the mix of action, family values, and a touch of humor made it one of the most beloved westerns of all time. But what fans didn't always see was the simmering tension underneath that polished surface. Bonanza had its share of behind-the-scenes challenges, creative disagreements, network restrictions, and some serious ideological clashes that nearly pulled the show apart. One of the major challenges the show had was with Pernell Roberts, the actor who played Adam Cartwright, the intellectual, brooding eldest son of Ben. On screen, he was calm, steady, and reliable. But off-screen, Roberts was a tornado of frustration. From the very start, he had major problems with the show's writing. He didn't think it was smart enough, bold enough, or true enough to the realities of life in the Old West. According to multiple reports, Roberts believed the scripts were too shallow and formulaic. He once said the show treated its viewers like they were unintelligent, and he openly criticized how it handled real moral and social issues. His exact words after he eventually quit the show were, "6 seasons of feeling like a damned ID, going around like a middle-aged teenager saying, 'Yes, Pa,' 'No, Pa,' on cue. It was downright disgusting. Such dialogue for a grown man." That's not all. He clashed often with producers and network executives who wanted to keep things light, simple, and non-controversial. Roberts wanted stories that dug into deeper human struggles, like racism, poverty, war, and corruption. But he felt the show tiptoed around these topics to stay safe for family audiences. And this constant tension wore everyone down. While the rest of the cast found a groove and embraced the show's family-friendly style, Roberts always felt like an outsider. He eventually walked away from Bonanza in 1965, even though the show was at its peak. It was a bold move and a risky one, but it spoke volumes about the artistic struggles simmering beneath the show's shiny exterior. Another difficult creative challenge Bonanza faced was how to tell meaningful stories without offending the strict standards of 1960s television, or the powerful people who controlled it. Remember, this was a time when the line between entertainment and morality was closely policed. Shows had to be clean, uplifting, and above all, non-controversial. Bonanza tried, at times, to push those limits. There were episodes that tackled issues like racial injustice, mental illness, and frontier ethics. But those scripts didn't always make it to air without a fight. For instance, any attempt to address racial tensions was carefully watched by NBC executives and censors. There were several scripts written that involved black characters facing discrimination or towns dealing with deep-seated prejudice. But many were rewritten, softened, or shelved altogether. Because NBC didn't want to risk losing sponsors or alienating conservative viewers. Michael Landon, in particular, pushed for more emotional real-world stories. He wanted Bonanza to grow with its audience and touch on deeper themes. But often, his ideas were met with a wall of resistance from producers worried about offending Middle America. The show was caught in a tug-of-war between artistic growth and staying marketable. And too often, commerce won. Another massive hurdle came from NBC's own internal rules. The network had strict guidelines for anything that aired during family hours, and Bonanza was planted right in the middle of Sunday night prime time. That meant no foul language, no inappropriate content, and no morally gray characters. Producers had to walk on eggshells every time they tried to explore something edgy or realistic. Storylines that dealt with alcoholism, spousal maltreatment, or political corruption often got watered down. Violence had to be carefully staged, and even the way characters died was tightly regulated. There's a famous story about an early script that featured a character suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder after war. It was raw, emotional, and written with real compassion. But NBC cut most of the script down, worried that it was too disturbing for a family audience. What aired instead was a far more generic version, which is still good, but a shadow of what it could have been. Writers and directors often found themselves trapped between wanting to make great art and needing to survive the censors. That pressure was relentless. As the years went on, the cast members themselves began pushing back more and more. Michael Landon, who had become a star as Little Joe, didn't just want to show up, say his lines, and smile for the camera. He wanted more control. He started writing episodes, directing some of them, and demanding that the show take itself more seriously. Dan Blocker, who played Hoss, was also eager to see more realism and depth. He hated episodes where the characters seemed too perfect, or the plots were too predictable. But the producers weren't always open to change. There were frequent battles over scripts, casting choices, and overall tone. Many fans never knew that some episodes that made it to air were actually compromised versions of what the actors and writers originally envisioned. Behind the scenes, the energy was often tense. There were power struggles, especially as Michael Landon gained more creative influence, and the mood could shift quickly from collaborative to combative. The cast remained mostly professional in front of the camera, but privately, frustrations simmered. Perhaps the most overlooked source of pressure came from sponsors that funded the show's existence. These sponsors had very specific ideas about what they wanted their products associated with. They loved that Bonanza was seen as wholesome, patriotic, and family-friendly. But they weren't shy about threatening to pull their advertisements if a storyline made them uncomfortable. Any hint of controversy, whether it was about race, women's rights, religious differences, or even poverty, could send sponsors into a panic. Some reports claimed that there were cases where entire episodes were rewritten or postponed because a sponsor expressed concern. This kind of corporate pressure kept Bonanza in a creative box. The writers and producers had ideas, but they constantly had to second-guess themselves. Would this joke upset a parent group? Would that scene suggest something inappropriate to a child? Could a mention of slavery or war upset a Midwest viewer? The creative team had to consider all of these questions, and many times the answer was to play it safe. By the mid-1960s, Bonanza had become a well-oiled machine, but some people felt like it had already lost its edge. The show was popular, but not as daring or insightful as some of its early writers had hoped. The internal conflicts over content, tone, and values left some serious scars. When fans tuned in, they saw harmony on the Ponderosa. But just behind the scenes, there were deep divides about what Bonanza could have been. Still, the show remained highly rated. It was deeply successful, even while struggling with its own identity. It was a Western that didn't quite want to be a Western, and a family drama that longed to say more, but often wasn't allowed to. But as difficult as those creative struggles were, there's another chapter in Bonanza's story that's even more complicated and far more mysterious. Over the years, certain episodes quietly vanished from reruns. Some were never aired again, and others were heavily edited or replaced with something more suitable. And so rumors and questions started to swirl. What happened to these episodes that were flat out pulled from circulation? And why? Were they too controversial? Too political? Or too real? Controversial and censored episodes. You may think Bonanza was the perfect wholesome Western with its clean-cut morals and strong family values. But it turns out there was a darker and far more complex side to the show, which resulted in multiple episodes being banned from airing on the Family Channel. And the person responsible for this is none other than televangelist and media mogul Pat Robertson, who once owned the network. That's right, when Bonanza was being rerun on the Family Channel, Robertson personally censored several episodes he felt didn't match the network's idea of family-friendly television. His goal was to keep things clean, moral, and aligned with what he believed were Christian values. But the strange part was the fact that these episodes weren't full of extreme violence or anything too disturbing. Instead, they dealt with themes like religion, outsiders, psychic visions, and towns with questionable ethics. But yet, that was enough to get them pulled. One of the episodes that fell victim to this cut was titled The Strange One, released in Season 4. The title already hints at something unusual, and that's exactly what this episode was. The Strange One tells the story of a mysterious character who behaves unlike anyone else on the Ponderosa. He's quiet, socially awkward, and doesn't quite fit in. This story challenged viewers to look beyond appearances and behavior so they could treat people with compassion, no matter how strange they might seem. At its heart, the episode was actually about tolerance and empathy. But in the eyes of the Family Channel, this theme of embracing people who don't fit the mold may have been a little too unconventional. Rather than celebrate the message, they removed the episode entirely. And just like that, the Strange One disappeared from the airwaves for decades. Another episode titled The Pursued sparked even more controversy. The episode was in 2 parts and was about a family of Mormon settlers traveling through the West. They were being harassed and driven out of towns just because of their beliefs and their polygamous lifestyle. In true Cartwright fashion, the family steps in to protect the Mormon travelers, offering them shelter and standing up to the mob that wants them gone. What made these episodes stand out was how Bonanza chose to show the human side of a family with a different religion. Rather than paint them as villains or joke material, which was pretty common back then, the show asked viewers to consider what it meant to be tolerant and just, even when the people you're helping don't look or live like you. But Pat Robertson probably didn't see it that way, because polygamy was portrayed. The episodes were seen as promoting ideas that clashed with the Family Channel's conservative Christian stance. And so, both parts were censored, meaning many fans never even knew they existed until DVD collections brought them back to light. A Season 7 episode titled A Visit to Upright was one of the more clever and morally complex stories in the Bonanza collection. The Cartwrights arrive in a town called Upright, a name that's clearly ironic because, although the town claims to stand for morals, order, and upright behavior, it quickly becomes clear that their version of uprightness is extremely judgmental and shallow. The Cartwrights get entangled in the town's politics and hypocrisy, leading to some tough confrontations about what real values actually look like. Well, this didn't sit well with Pat Robertson. The episode was pulled from syndication for suggesting that people who act morally might still be deeply flawed or even dangerous in their moral rigidity. It's a subtle but powerful message, and one that might have hit too close to home for a network obsessed with appearances. A second site from Season 8 was also taken down for a more serious reason. This episode revolves around a woman who claims to have psychic visions. She's able to sense danger, predict events, and even read people's emotions. Naturally, this causes unease among the Cartwrights and the townsfolk. The show doesn't say whether she's truly psychic or just intuitive, but it doesn't exactly dismiss her either. It leaves the door open for the supernatural, which was rare for Bonanza. That openness to psychic power made it a target for censorship because Robertson's Family Channel wanted nothing to do with anything that might suggest occult themes or anything outside traditional Christianity. So, this episode was scrubbed from reruns, labeled as inappropriate, and quietly faded into obscurity. For years, fans watching Bonanza reruns on TV had no idea they were missing out on important episodes. These stories added depth to the characters and nuance to the world of the Ponderosa. They showed us that even the Cartwrights had to wrestle with moral dilemmas. Now, these 5 episodes weren't the only moments in Bonanza history to stir up trouble. And while some episodes were too bold to air, the real shock came when Bonanza quietly disappeared from the screens with no farewell and no warning. The unspoken goodbye. For a show that ruled the airwaves for over a decade, you'd expect a farewell worthy of its achievements. Maybe a sweeping final ride into the sunset, or a touching goodbye among brothers, or at the very least, a moment that allowed fans to say goodbye to the Cartwrights. But Bonanza didn't get that. It didn't go out with fireworks or a final bow. It simply faded away. The final episode of Bonanza, titled The Hunter, aired on January 16, 1973. But calling it a grand finale is an overstatement. There was no fanfare, no sense of an ending, no emotional curtain call for the Cartwright family. Instead, it was just another episode. In fact, it barely featured the Cartwrights at all. The story focused almost entirely on a new character played by guest star Tom Skerritt, portraying a man being hunted like prey in the wilderness. There was no Ben Cartwright offering wise counsel, no brotherly bonding between the brothers. Instead, it was just a strange, disconnected story that looked nothing like the Bonanza viewers had come to love. And just like that, the show was over. In fact, there was no build-up, no hint to audiences that this would be the last ride. NBC didn't air a special, didn't send out press releases heralding the end of a TV era. They simply pulled the plug. It turns out that ratings had been slipping for months, especially after the show was moved to a less favorable time slot. But for longtime viewers, that didn't soften the blow. One week, the Ponderosa was still open for business, and the very next, it was just gone. Part of the show's decline was rooted in tragedy. The sudden death of Dan Blocker in 1972, who played the beloved Hoss Cartwright, was a devastating blow both to the cast and to audiences. Instead of recasting the role or giving the character a proper farewell, the writers simply removed him from the narrative. Hoss was gone without explanation, and for fans who had grown up with these characters, this quiet erasure felt cold and incomplete. The cast wasn't given closure either. After 14 years of playing the same roles, building real bonds both on and off screen, actors like Lorne Greene and Michael Landon had no chance to properly say goodbye to the fans or to each other on camera. They showed up for what turned out to be the final shoot, unaware that it would be their last. In fact, Lorne Greene said, "If we had known this was coming, we would have gone out with a bang and not a whimper." And that's what makes Bonanza's ending stand out. Other legendary series had emotional, carefully crafted finales. They gave their characters a send-off, let fans grieve, and tied up loose ends. But despite being one of the longest-running and most iconic westerns of all time, Bonanza got no such treatment. It simply disappeared into the television dust. Years later, NBC attempted to revive the spirit of the show with Bonanza, The Next Generation, a made-for-TV movie in the late 1980s that followed the descendants of the original Cartwrights. While it brought back some familiar faces, like Lorne Greene in archival footage or through narration, it sadly never captured the original magic. These attempts to reignite the flame only served to remind fans of what had been lost. In the end, the story of Bonanza's final episode is one of missed opportunities. It was a show that shaped television history, gave audiences a second home on the Ponderosa, and then vanished without a proper goodbye. No last ride, no parting words, just the echo of boots on wooden floors, and the distant sound of a theme song that once stirred the hearts of millions. Even though Bonanza ended without a grand finale, its impact on television has never truly faded. As one of the first shows filmed in color, it helped drive the popularity of color TV across America. Its bold storytelling, mixing moral lessons, family values, and frontier grit, set the tone for countless shows that followed. The Cartwrights weren't just characters. They were part of the American household, shaping how families were portrayed on screen. Over 430 episodes later, Bonanza still airs in syndication, introducing new generations to the Ponderosa Ranch and its timeless tales. Its influence can be seen in everything from modern westerns to family dramas, proving that the heart of the show never went out of style. But what do you think? Was there something deeper behind the sudden cancellation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting videos and untold stories.